are continuing our series called Fully Devoted. We're working on some very important things going on. I think I'm hearing some like rappers, and I think somebody still got their mic on in the room back there. I'm hearing somebody fiddle with some like plastic or something. I don't know, in the monitors. That's kind of strange. That was pretty funny. All right, nonetheless, sorry. I'm so ADD, I can't help it. My bad. Back on task here. We're doing this series called Fully Devoted. It comes from this idea that we want to see certain things over the next 5 years, a big vision for our church that we've been praying through, fasting and thinking about and planning. And it kind of goes like this. I'll show this slide. It's 3,000 gospel conversations, 300 disciples trained, 30 gospel workers sent, and then 3 churches planted. It's an incredible vision for our church that we've been thinking and we're so excited about. And I think as you look at these, it's like some of these are like, wow, that's incredible. Some look very easy, some look difficult, but it's going to take God to do a mighty work in our body to see these things come to fruition. Now, obviously, we don't want to just be so concerned on these numbers, but it's just like we said when we started, we want to steer our ship toward this direction. And where we land, who knows, but that's at least the direction that we as a leadership here want to steer us to. And so the first step in this process is we thought in order for any of this to happen, we are going to have to become fully devoted followers first. Because our mission statement says it like this: we exist to make disciples who are fully devoted followers of Christ for His glory among all nations. So if you have a book, or if you haven't picked up one, we really encourage you to pick up one. And you can kind of see over the last few weeks on page 10 and 11, the first week we went over growing, what it means to become a fully devoted follower of Christ. We said it means that one is growing. And then we define what growing means. And we give you a short bullet point and then a little bit longer biblical explanation. And then last week we did gathering, which is on page 22 and 23. If you want to check those out, we believe fully devoted followers of Christ are gathering. Well, today we're moving on to our third out of our 4 marks of a fully devoted follower of Christ. And that one is concerned, or what the topic of today is, the third mark that we've identified is that a fully devoted follower of Christ is giving. Now you got to pay careful attention today because we're succinct in what we're saying, but we're going to say a lot. We are combining 2 unique concepts into one. And if you're careful, you might miss this. We are saying giving is both financially and serving with your time and your giftings in the body of Christ. We're proposing even on the outset that these 2 ideas are not mutually exclusive. They're not separate. There's no dichotomy. They exist together. To be a fully devoted follower of Christ, that means that one is giving financially to the work of the ministry and then giving of their time and giftings to serve the body of Christ. But first, we're going to take these in 2 parts, and so we'll focus on the financial piece first, and then we'll move to the serving piece. But what I'm about to say has the potential to be misunderstood. And I know this because over the years as I've taught through this, it has been misunderstood. And I hear, oh, well, Paul says this about giving. And I hear what they say, and I'm like, that is not at all what I say about giving. So it's going to be very crucial that you pay attention to the words that I say because we don't want to have a misunderstanding this morning. Amen? Because I don't know about you, but if you've ever been a part of misunderstandings, they're not very fun. Maybe I shared this story with you before. I was just thinking back this week on what's a good story of a misunderstanding. I had a lot to choose from, okay? For some reason, they follow me for some reason. I don't know why. But when my family and I were in Dubai, we were learning Arabic, and it was kind of interesting, right? And you would learn a new word, and you would want to practice it. So the word that we were learning that day was Qarib min, right? You're going to learn a little bit of Arabic this morning. Qarib min just means near. So we would say like, Beiti Qarib min el masjid, which is like my house, Beiti, Qarib min, near the masjid or the mosque, all right? Beiti Qarib min masjid. All right, so I was like so impressed by my new word, all right? It's pretty cool. I speak Arabic now. And then I was like, my neighbor, I am near to my neighbor, Qarib min. So I saw my neighbor. It just so happens that my neighbor is a 40-year-old lady, my age, right? And walks out of her house. I'm with my wife, by the way. True story. Okay, we're with each other, so this will help the story. So she walks out, and I want to say my new word to her. So I said, Anna, me, krimen anti, which is like, I am near to you. Just like my house is near the masjid, I am near to you. And she said, huh, and like jumped back. And I was like, oh no, what just happened? She said, la 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 la, mafi krimen anti. Like meaning I am not near to you in that way, because what I essentially said that we were near in intimacy with one another. Obviously, there was a misunderstanding that day. But here's the concept. The word krimen is not a bad word, but used in the wrong context can distort the meaning. So what I want to tell you today, and I don't want there to be a misunderstanding, we say a word here often in our culture today called tithing, okay? Tithing is not a bad word, but used in the wrong context or in the wrong way, I think has the potential to distort the biblical meaning of giving. So therefore, here's the misunderstanding part, and you're going to And inevitably, there's going to be people in here that do not agree with the statement that I'm about to make. And I'm okay with that. We can agree to disagree. But I confess to you, and I profess that I don't want to stand here to tell you, I want you to tithe. I was even going over this with other different people, and they're like, well, you have to put that language in there. I was like, no, you don't understand. I don't want to implore our people to tithe. They're like, it was like I was saying something heretical. But hear me out. I think tithing has the potential to distort the meaning of giving today. Instead, I want to frame giving in another way. Not just, hey, you need to tithe. Here's the way that I want to structure the way we give here at church. And I have a little graph to kind of help us here. I believe there are Old Testament instructions for giving. That's very clear. We're going to see some of those today. But then I also believe there are New Testament instructions for giving. Here's what I want to do. I don't profess that either one of those that we can take at face value and go one-to-one, and then we give that way today. But I think both of those ideas should inform the way that we give today. Does that make sense? So this is the way I want to frame it. It would be easy for me just to say, hey, you know what? You need to tithe. It was in the Old Testament. We see somewhat of it in the New Testament, so you as a church, we need to tithe. I don't want to say that. I want to say, you know what? There's Old Testament instructions. There's New Testament instructions. How do those concepts of giving inform and teach us how we should give today? Are we good so far? No one's walked out, so we're okay, all right? We're still going to hear me out at least. All right. On July 7th, 2024, I preached a sermon on giving. In that sermon, I went in detail in the Old Testament instructions for giving. I don't have time to go back through all of those scriptures today. So if you want to explore more on this topic, go back in our YouTube channel to July 7th, 2024 on the 12 characteristics of giving, the 12 characteristics of a healthy church / giving, and you will find a larger explanation from the Old Testament on what it says about giving. Because I think the common thought is the Old Testament people gave a 10% tithe. So we today should give a 10% tithe. I think this is a very common way to think about giving, but I want to challenge you with something different. Because the reality is, and if you explore those scriptures that we did on July 7th, what you will find is it's not necessarily that the Old Testament people gave a tithe of 10% and now we should give a 10% tithe. The Israelites gave 14 tithes over 7 years. So if you add all of these tithes up over a 7-year period, it's really estimated that they gave an average of 20 to 23% of their income every year. You can look it up. This is not me just saying these things just off the cuff here. It's in Scripture. It's there. You can go find it. And if you need help, go to July 7th, 2024. So when we see this, it's like, okay, 20 to 23%. What in the world was happening? I thought tithe meant tenth. Well, yes, it did on certain things, but there were multiple tithes that happened over this course of time. But what we can say is this. Go to this next slide. There are some principles of the Old Testament giving that I think are very crucial for us to understand. And you'll see the list there. Hopefully it's kind of small. You might need your glasses. It was a tithe of currency. Their currency might have been different in this time. It was grain, fruit, and livestock, but it still functioned as a currency. It was perpetual, meaning it happened on a consistent basis. There were yearly, every third year, and every seventh year tithe continually. It was for the service of the Lord, either for the Levites or the priests or the temple system. It was given for the service of the Lord. Other tithes were given to religious festivals. And then there was obviously some tithes that went to the poor to look out for the Levite, the fatherless, and the widow. And I would say based on the average amount that they gave, 20 to 23%, was very sacrificial in nature. Can you imagine just giving away 23% of your income to the temple service? But what I'm proposing is it's going to be really difficult to take how they gave in the Old Testament and directly apply it to our context today, because there's a few contextual things going on that would make it very difficult or somewhat impossible to emulate. As we know, the Old Testament and the Old Covenant, it was made with Israel at Sinai, and the nation of Israel was a theocratic state. This is kind of some context here. It may be a little boring, but I think it's very crucial for us to understand. It was a theocratic state, meant that Israel as a nation had God as their king early on, right? So it was set up as a theocratic state. There was no separation between church and state. The government and their religion was all one. And so the tithes and the 20 to 23% acted somewhat as a tax as well in order to care for the temple system that was in place, in order to have the sacrifices and the priests and the Levites serve in the temple. They had to initiate this tithing law in order to make this temple system function. Well, today, obviously, we don't have a temple complex that we are trying to operate in the New Testament. There's obviously some things going on here in the grain and the livestock offerings that would not really make a lot of sense if we directly applied them in to the New Testament and even into our day today. However, there are principles of this Old Testament instructions that can apply for us. And I would say that it's this. Maybe I don't have a graph or anything, but I think they gave financially. And so therefore, if you can see where I'm going with this, I think we today should give financially, because that's the problem and the misunderstanding that happens. I've heard this so many times. Like, well, you don't believe in tithing. And then the next conversation that they have with somebody is like, Paul doesn't believe we should give to the church. I said, huh? That is two completely different things. And I want to make sure we understand that correctly. I believe that we can apply this giving financially as a part of the way that we give today. I think like the Old Testament, we should give perpetually, continually. We should give for the sake of ministry and ministers. We should give to the Christian community in support of religious celebrations. We should give to care for the poor, and we should give sacrificially. Those are all things that come from the Old Testament instructions that I think we can apply to today. So now, go ahead and if you got a Bible, turn to 1 Corinthians 16. We're going to set the Old Testament aside. Not set it aside. We're just going to pause on that for a minute. And we're going to move to the New Testament to try to build now our New Testament instructions for giving. Go back. You're 2 slides ahead, I think. There you go. Maybe we're missing a slide, it looks like. It's okay. We'll do it in a minute. It's cool. Yeah, there it is. Awesome. Thanks, man. All right. 1 Corinthians 16. We're going to get there in a second. We're going to look at the New Testament instructions for giving. But a little context here to make sure that we're on the same page about this. Just like in the Old Testament, there was some contextual things going on that may not go one-to-one to our culture today. In the same way, the New Testament instructions for giving, it was very specific, based on a very specific contextual event that was happening. And so I would propose also in the same way, it's very hard to take the New Testament instructions verbatim and just slap them on to our context because there was something very unique going on. If you know the history in this context, in 1 Corinthians 16, in Jerusalem, there was a severe persecution going on. Now, there was famine in the last 7 to 10 years that had impacts in this day when 1 Corinthians came out, but there was also this large persecution against Christians living in Jerusalem. If you remember, most of the Christians fled Jerusalem, but there were still some that remained, and of the ones that remained, they were going through a very difficult experience. And so Paul, as he traveled throughout the churches in the known world at the time of the Roman Empire, he was collecting an offering in order to help the church in Jerusalem. And this is where we come to today, and we're going to find this collection that he's talking about, and we can learn some principles of this collection. So let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 16. I'm going to read verses 1 through 4. All right, here's what it says. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. All right? So I think there's some very important things that we need to notice. It says, on the first day of the week. If you're looking at this and we think, what are some principles? What is the New Testament doing? Well, they gave regularly, perpetually, on a consistent basis. This whole idea of this collection for the saints that we see here, and even in verse 1, right now concerning the collection for the saints, this collection with the Greek word was logeia, which simply means, if in context here, the Greek word was used for a financial collection or a contribution gathered for a cause. Now remember, in the Old Testament, it was food, grain, livestock. So Paul was not able to go to the churches in Galatia and say, hey, can you send your livestock to Jerusalem? That would be pretty challenging, wouldn't it, to transport livestock and grain and food all the way across those roads. So instead, he said, we're going to take up a collection for the saints. And this collection in terminology in the first century equated to this. It was a money gathered for the relief of the poor. So on the first day of the week, they set aside a collection perpetually. And then at one time, Paul came and gathered what they set aside each week, and then he took it to the church in Jerusalem. Notice in verse 2, he said, set something aside. He didn't say, set 10% aside so that we can make sure we're doing exactly what the Old Testament said, right? No, he said, set something aside as God has purposed in your heart, as you're praying through and thinking about giving, set this gift aside each week, and then I'm going to come at one time and I'm going to get it and take it to the church in Jerusalem. So they gave financially, they gave regularly, they gave perpetually, and they gave for the work of the ministry. Like what they were doing as a body of believers, not just one church, as a body of believers, they identified an area of ministry that needed assistance. And so they prayed through this, and I'm sure their leadership thought through this, and they put together this plan in order to collect for this special event, in order to take this money and give to the church. It's not like there was this extreme command to say you have to give in this particular way. No. It was as the leadership saw this, they gathered these funds financially and took them for the work of this ministry. If you think about it, even in today's context, we do the same thing in a way, right? Like we have a church budget that as you give to our body, it goes into our church budget. And who establishes that church budget? Not me, right? You. How do we approve this? You vote on it. You have committees that are represented from the peers that are sitting around you right now. And then once your committees and peers develop this budget, we present it to the church to decide, okay, is this what we as a church want to do with the funds that are given financially to our church? And then we say yes or no. And if we say yes, then we as leadership try to carry that out, your wishes. And then we appoint the committees and different things to spend this money in the ways that you have voted to spend it. It's for the work of the ministry. Flip on over to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Maybe it won't be too hard to find. In most Bibles, it's right after 1 Corinthians. That was a bad joke, but thank you, Ellen, for laughing. There's some more principles about this same similar collection for the saints that we find in 2 Corinthians. If you're looking at 2 Corinthians, I'm going to read verses 1 through 5. This is going to speak to the heart of how they gave. He says, "We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia." Check this out. "For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part." Did you guys catch that? In a severe test of affliction and in extreme poverty. What was the result of that poverty and extreme whatever they said, severe test of affliction? They gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord. Look at verse 4. "Begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints." So even in their poverty and even in their severe test of affliction, they gave generously, and they even begged to take part in this offering. And even Paul says in verse 5 here, "And this is not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us." Paul was looking at the situation there and seeing the context and what was going on in the churches of Macedonia and Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea. And he said, whew, yeah, these churches are not going to be able to give very much to this offering, to the support of the saints in Jerusalem. But when he showed up, it's like, oh my goodness, there's incredible amount of funding. What happened? And then he sees that they gave out of their poverty and out of their severe test of affliction, even begging to be a part of this work of the ministry. So if we're seeing some of those principles, they gave generously, even sacrificially. But then if we put 2 Corinthians 9 with 2 Corinthians 8, I can think we see they gave cheerfully. I can even read this 2 Corinthians 9:7 if you don't believe me. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Giving cheerfully, that's a very unique concept. I don't know if you guys have ever had like an extremely high bill to pay. Like something tragic happened in your family or something. I say tragic, not like that tragic, but like we got a huge tax bill last year, or our air unit went out one year, something like that, right? And when there's a large sum of money that has to come from you, you're like, oh, that, cheerful is not exactly the word that I would use, if that makes sense, right? If you're giving an amount of money that hurts you, it's like cheerful is not that word that we would describe. But as these people in this situation were going through an extremely difficult time and gave out of the poverty of their heart, were cheerful and joyous in their giving. And then they said, God honored this. He doesn't want a reluctant giver, right? He wants someone that gives cheerfully. And we understand this, right? Like, can you imagine God's like, okay, here you go, God. Okay, here, have it, take it. Like, does he even want it at that point, right? He wants these cheerful givers. So if we see the New Testament instructions for giving, I think what we find is it's financial, it's for the work of the ministry, it's regular, it's generous, it's sacrificial, and it's cheerful. So now let's look at these. And as we put these two together, these are the concepts that I drew together in order to inform how we should give today. And it's going to be in your book, and we're going to read it in a minute, but not yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. So if we should see how we should give today, it's financially, and it's for the work of ministry, which we bring from the Old Testament, and then there's adding this New Testament on. It's regular, generous, and cheerful. Financially, for the work of ministry, regularly, generously, and cheerfully. Test me on this concept, okay? Because some of you are still bothered by my whole tithing comment, okay? Don't raise your hand, but I know you're out there. You don't have to. let me test you on this. Or let me say this and you can test your own heart. I believe you can tithe and be disobedient to the Scripture's commands of giving. Think about this. It's very practical. We're practical people. Let's think about this. You can tithe, but not tithe regularly and perpetually. Is that fair? Right? But you're thinking, well, maybe if it's a tithe or 10%, okay. So maybe not that one, but I think so. Let's look at this second one. You can tithe, but not be generous. Maybe there's some of you out here in this circumstance. That's not me and my family, but maybe there are some of you out there that if you give 10% of your income, you don't feel it at all. So you can tithe, be obedient to the tithe, but yet also be disobedient to give generously. And what about this one? Surely we can all agree with this one. You can tithe, but not be cheerful, right? That's easy, right? We can easily give a tithe and be reluctant and do it out of compulsion. So if you see it, it's not making sense if we just say you have to tithe. Well, no, we think you should give financially. We should give for the work of ministry, but do it regularly, generously, and cheerfully. That would be a better way, a more biblically accurate way to give. So hopefully you can see I'm not saying we shouldn't give, and I'm not even saying we shouldn't give sacrificially. We should do all of those things, but I think there are other commands about giving that we have to add to that the tithe alone will fall short. And I believe the tithe could be a good baseline for your giving. I'm not saying that, all right? If you're saying like, hey, 10% is, I do that on a regular basis, it's generous, it's sacrificial on my part, I'm doing it cheerfully, I'm doing it for the work of the ministry. You see what I'm saying? That could be okay. If that's what God has communicated with you and you're working with Him through this, and that's kind of the point that you guys land is very generous, then I say that's okay. But just don't use that as this compulsion rule in your life. And if you look at the Old Testament, I think anytime you hear teachings on giving, what you'll find is that like in the Old Testament, hey, they gave 10%. Well, think about how much more we should want to give today than they gave in the Old Testament. The covenant that we're under is a better covenant. God freely gave out of His grace, out of His abundant grace to save you and I. We owe our life to Jesus. We owe our eternity to Jesus. So we're talking about this cheerful giving. It should be a response in worship to the gospel that Jesus came from heaven, died on a cross for our sins, took the punishment that we deserved, rose from the dead that we're going to celebrate here pretty soon to give us life here and everlasting. So how could we not say that the covenant that we're under should compel us, not by compulsion, but out of a response of worship to give sacrificially to this King? A story that I love to talk about when we talk about giving, there's several. One's always George Mueller, and I'm going to indirectly talk about him today. But another one is C.T. Studd. I know I've mentioned this guy a few times, but if you've never read his biography, I would highly encourage it. C.T. Studd said it like this as a response to Jesus. He said, if Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for Him. You think, oh, that's nice, Studd, but what did you do to back that up? Well, he inherited millions of dollars in an inheritance. And he sold his inheritance and gave it away to multiple ministries out of response to what Christ did in his life. And he gave his giving to primarily 3 places. He gave a large sum of money to the China Inland Missions. You guys ever heard of that one? If you're studying missions history, it might be sounding really familiar. He gave another third of his portion to D.L. Moody in his crusades. You guys ever heard me talk about D.L. Moody? And then he gave another portion of his inheritance to George Mueller to care for the orphans in England. And you think about what occurred through his willingness to say, you know what? I want to live for you, Jesus, and I want to give sacrificially to your causes. The gospel went out. The gospel movement through China Inland Missions changed China. And it changed so many missionaries after that. So many people came to faith through the crusades of D.L. Moody. And so many people were cared for, and so many others inspired by the work of George Mueller. So let me not implore to you as a command to give under compulsion, but rather this idea to give out of a response for worship, to participate in the work that Jesus is doing all around our globe. When you give, the gospel goes out. We here at First Baptist take this very seriously. There's nothing that we hide. Everything is out in the open. You can see everything that we give to. And so therefore, we can just say, without reluctance, just to say, give, and you know where your money is going. Once you give, things happen. We have an incredible tool for ministry here in Mayfield, Kentucky. The offerings that you give and the ways that you give help support what we do here. We have to keep these lights on to keep this building functioning so that we can minister to this community. We have discipleship groups from babies to older adults. I don't know the best word for older adults, but you know who I'm talking about, okay? Our giving supports this. We're caring for our Jerusalem, right? There are so many things that transpire in this week to minister to this body of believers and this community that we're a part of. But what's also really cool is when we give here to the church, we also give to support the work outside of our church. We last year gave over $300,000 in support of missions around the world. It's over $250,000 that we just gave away as a church. So hear me. What happens is you give to us as a church, and we give that away in support of the work of the ministry, over $300,000 of it. There's incredible things to be a part of here at First Baptist Church as it's concerned with giving. We give a Founders Day offering, and it goes to support our mission trips in Arizona and Dubai, hopefully Dubai in the fall now. We're going to postpone that from April to the fall. Hopefully in the next year or so, we're going to give another Founders Day, and we're going to help support Blake and Abby Shoecraft. You ever heard of these guys? Abby's right back there if you need to meet her today. Blake's not here, but that's okay. We like Abby better, so I just said that so that Blake can hear me, all right? He's not here, but nonetheless, I'll point him to the minute of this sermon that I say that. When we give, the gospel goes out. We fund church plants. We fund missions. You guys know this guy? Let me show a picture. You remember this guy? Jerry? Anybody remember Jerry? You might forget about Jerry on a daily basis. I don't, because he texts me every day. I love you, Jerry, by the way. I know you're watching this. Appreciate you, brother. Jerry does an incredible work in Pakistan, a place that we can't get to. Every single week, he ministers to a group of people at his home that you guys at First Baptist built for him to do this ministry, the house that he's standing in front of right now. And then he also, every single week, it's just incredible to realize this, every single week he drives the distance of Chicago. So on a Saturday night, his family leaves out and drives to a village that's as far as Chicago is from here. And he puts on this Bible study every week. These are not Christian brothers and sisters here. These are Hindu background believers looking to have someone teach them about this man named Jesus Christ. This ministry is funded through your giving. That's the only way this is happening. You guys bought him a car that allows him to drive 6 hours. Then they serve food to this group of people, which comes from your funding that you give. And he stands up and he teaches them about this man named Jesus Christ through the Gospel of John right now to a person they've never even heard of. When you give, this is what happens. And maybe this is the time for a shameless plug that as you look at this Bible study right now and the women are trying to put shade up over their head, it's starting to get hot in Pakistan, and they've had to move locations due to the extreme persecution in this area. And he is needing a tent or tarp to go over this roof, not a roof, but to make a roof of where they teach every week right now. And so if you're like, man, I want to give to this, these are just extra outside of our budget. We have a line item in our budget that says Project Pakistan. You can give to this to help support this ministry. I know that's one incredible need that he needs right now that he asks me for every couple weeks. Like, hey, it's getting really hot. Do you have any money for shade? I was like, well, I don't right now, but let me ask our church to see if anybody would have any willingness to want to take part in this project. It doesn't cost a lot, but nonetheless, that's Jerry. There's multiple. I could go on and on about the ways that you are giving that's impacting the kingdom of God. And my time is just running. I'm sorry, church, but it's still early. We're okay. Is everybody good, comfortable? Okay, keep it going. All right, let's do this. If you get your books out, turn to page 32. So on page 32, if you pull all these thoughts together, you're going to see some of these words that come out in what we've said. Hopefully you understand, like, we've thought through this significantly. We've put so much time to make these thoughts very concise. And the first bullet point there, it says, a fully devoted follower of Christ consistently gives financially to the work of ministry. And then the little part under it says, disciples give regularly, generously, and cheerfully in obedience as a response to God's abundant grace. That's what we want to profess to you, that in order to become a fully devoted follower of Christ, this piece needs to exist. But that's not all. And I've got some time, a little. This bullet point, the second bullet point, a fully devoted follower of Christ consistently serves God with their time and giftings. Disciples actively use their gifts and time volunteering in various ministries within the church. If you got your Bibles, stay with me in 1 Corinthians 16, but flip over to verse 15. So 1 Corinthians chapter 16, in verse 15. If you remember from 2 Corinthians 16, verse 1, it talked about there was a collection for the saints. And then we saw this where it was very financial in nature, okay? But even in the same chapter, this is really, really cool. I hope you love this, because I did. This is pretty cool stuff. In verse 15, look at what it says here. Now I urge you, brothers, you know that the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to to the service of the saints. So check this out. There's a collection for the saints, but then there's also a service of the saints. Now verse 16, check this out. Be subject to such as these, and to every, not just Stephanas at this point, but to every fellow worker and laborer. So there's this idea of it goes beyond just a mere collection for the saints. And it said this service to the saints. And you look at this word, it literally means ministry, missions, relief, and support. So he's saying, he's trying to call out this Stephanas. He said, you know what? There's this man named Stephanas. He's devoted to this missions, ministry, relief, and support of the saints. And then he says, and to every other person, not just Stephanas, but in your church, as he's writing this to the Corinthians, every other church who is participating in this service of the saints, this ministry, missions, relief, and support, working and laboring for this cause. He's commending them in this. So I'm using that to say, I think if you look at this in 1 Corinthians 16, we focus so much on the financial piece, and rightfully so. But then even before he closes 16, he wants to commend brothers also to the service of the saints, both financial and serving of their time and giftings for the work of the ministry. And today, that's what we're trying to do, is connect both of these to say these are not mutually exclusive things. These things have to come together as fully devoted followers of Christ. Give and serve. Maybe I can end it this way, and if the musicians and the worship team want to go ahead and be making their way up, I have one final story. One of my favorite stories to talk about, but in a little different way this time. The story of Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot did an incredible work of missions. But Jim Elliot could not do his missions without a missionary pilot. A missionary pilot by the name of Nate Saint flew the team of 5 missionaries into Ecuador, into the jungles, in order to minister and to send Bibles and relief and trying to share the gospel with these tribes in these distant lands. If you're thinking of this concept, Nate Saint and other missionary pilots were always trying to raise funds in order to get the gospel to these areas. Someone once asked him, he said, how does this ministry happen? What can we do to take part in this ministry? And he famously said this, he said, the plane cannot fly on faith alone. He was very practical. He's like, look, we need to get these Bibles. We need to get these missionaries into these places, but faith is not going to fly it alone. The plane needs fuel. Fuel costs money. So I implore the churches, if you want to support our ministry, give financially so that we can fill the plane up with fuel and fly the much needed resources in to make the gospel spread. Then he stopped them and said, don't hear me, because we can fill that plane up with fuel. We can load it with Bibles. We can put missionaries in it. But it's not going to fly on fuel alone. It needs a pilot. It needs someone that is willing to serve with their time, to fly with the skills that they have, to take these Bibles and these missionaries in order to advance the gospel. Church, I hope you're seeing the concept that I want to bring together in this story. The work of the ministry, it can't happen on faith alone. Inevitably, it needs funds in order to propel the gospel forward. But funds alone, it doesn't fly the plane. It needs a pilot. It needs servants who are willing to use their skills and their giftings in order to take these resources and implant them in a world that so desperately needs this gospel ministry. So church, it's our prayer that we at First Baptist not only give financially, but we also serve with our time and resources to advance God's kingdom in this world.
My name is Marley Wilkerson. I'm 17 years old. I go to Graves County High School. My parents are Jennifer and Nathan Wilkerson. I have 2 brothers, Jet and Asher. I've always gone to church as a little kid, and I remember one night I was at my grandma's house and I just started crying so much because I just needed to give my life to Christ. So I was spending the night there, and my parents came down there and talked to me, and I got saved that night.
There was one story in particular that came up. It had to do with the first Founders Day after you and your family came here. I think maybe it had something to do with a baggie filled with change. Does any of that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that. Do you remember how old you were? Tell me how that came about.
I was probably around 6 years old whenever I came here, and I remember that I had a piggy bank full of change. So we put it all in a bag. My parents agreed to it. I talked to them about it, and they were like, yeah. And so I put all of that change into a bag, and I brought it to church and was ready to give it.
Why at such a young age?
I felt that there was a reason for this, and I wanted to help in any way I could. I heard all these announcements about Founders Day and all these offerings, and I heard my family talking about it, and so I wanted to be a part in that.
What are other areas of your life that you would say are in the same spirit of giving?
I feel like giving my time, going on many different mission trips, like to the Middle East and Arizona. I tagged along with my mom, going to different women's events, and I went at a young age, and that just led to more and more growing relationships with those other women around, and that led me to be involved in Mission Friends. Starting Mission Friends meant that I got to teach the younger generations about missions around the world, which is very near and dear to my heart because I feel like I'm called to do that.
Is there anything about that you found that has surprised you about giving and serving? Have you had an opportunity to say, wow, that really does make a difference?
Going on mission trips, I didn't think that it would grow me as much as it has. Like, I used to not talk at all. I used to be like so shy, and like going on these things has helped me like to talk to people and get to know them, and like asking even where they're from. It just opens up a conversation that nobody would even realize. And it's just so much fun to get to know people and communicate with them and be a leader in all those aspects of missions. And going to Arizona, it was just like very eye-opening.
If you had one shot, one opportunity to talk with someone about the importance of giving and the impact it's made in your life, the impact it's made for the gospel, your walk with Christ, if you could encourage someone to dive in, what would you say?
I would say that it's very important to do so. One small act of giving can lead to one big impact in God's kingdom, and it really just makes a big difference in your life.